my name is Katie Castro. I am a fourth-year PhD student in the Occupational Injury Prevention Program, and I will be discussing the study assessing the mental health impact of COVID-19 pandemic on U.S. fire-based emergency medical services responders. All right, it's a mouthful. So a little bit of background, pre-pandemic trends show an increase in EMS calls while fire calls have been on the decrease. So you can kind of see that fire calls in the red down there have been on a steady decrease since about 1980, while EMS calls have been rising exponentially. And this is something to note because not only are these EMS responders really inundated with calls, there have not been enough EMS responders growing with the growth of calls. So in addition to just the demands of this population from society, we also have additional occupational stressors, including inadequate sleep, insufficient recovering time after each shift, 12-hour shifts, low job satisfaction, and then trauma response, leading to burnout and post-traumatic stress disorder. So also thinking about the COVID-19 pandemic, it's thought that the uncertainty and physical demands of the pandemic further compounded the influences of these stressors on this population. So the authors hypothesized that stress was very high during this time. So the purpose of the study was to quantitatively capture the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the fire service safety culture, behavior and morale, levers of well-being and well-being outcomes, and to describe the trends observed in these metrics during the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. So here's the conceptual framework, which is essentially showing that safety climate and leadership are upstream influencers that influence everything down the line from behavior and morale to well-being outcomes. And then down at the bottom, there's the levers of well-being, which are thought to interact or affect the relationship in between behavior and morale and then well-being outcomes. So what's really important here is the safety climate as kind of the main influence on this model. And that's measured in this population with management commitment and supervisor support. So management commitment is how the fire service members view that their management values their safety. And so those would be like people at the department level, white shirts, people up high. And then supervisor support are how fire members perceive that their direct supervisors value their safety. So that's like within stations, those would be captains, lieutenants, that kind of level. So here is the inclusion criteria. So this map is a map of all the departments that were a part of this study. The focus sample is indicated by the blue stars, and it's a subset of departments that have participated in Focus 2.0, which is the Fire Service Organizational Culture of Safety Survey at the first center, which is the Center for Firefighter Injury Research and Safety Trends. So they were already participating in this study. And having assessed with focus, let them be eligible to participate in this rapid study. So there were 96 eligible focus departments. 20 of them were invited based on FEMA region focus response rate. They wanted to make sure that they were capable of getting an adequate response rate so the data could be reliable, and that's at about a 60% level. And then also based on COVID-19 cases and department size. So the second sample that's included in this larger rapid sample is the SAVER study, which is stress and violence against fire-based EMS responders. And those are indicated by the red stars on this map. And this was a prospective cohort study with 3 large metro career fire departments and their associated unions. And approximately 200 fire-based EMS responders were recruited from each of these departments. And the inclusion criteria includes anyone who's actively employed at these departments who are 911 dispatchers, lifeguards, EMTs, paramedics, single or dual role firefighters, and they have to be 18 years of age or older. And the exclusion criteria is anyone who's 75 years or older or has more than 60 years of experience. And this is because they really wanted to make sure that they got people who are more likely to participate in patient care. So the tool used for data collection was the rapid mental health assessment, which was comprised of the data collection tools from these projects. So the survey for the focus project measured safety climate as well as organizational and well-being outcomes. And that was added to SAVER, which had everything that focus had, but also added mental health outcomes. And then they wanted to see how COVID-19 was impacting these fire service members. So they made a list of questions regarding COVID-19 specifically. So all of those were compounded to make the rapid mental health assessment. And so here are all the measures that were captured and used for this study. We have safety, climate, and leadership with the management commitment and supervisor support, leadership and supervisor sense-giving. We have behavior and morale, which is that safety compliance behavior, job satisfaction, morale, and engagement. Levers of well-being, which is decision-making, resilience, social support, and recovery experience. And then the well-being outcomes, which is burnout, intent to leave the profession, stress, anxiety, and depression. So data collection, data was collected between May and October of 2020, and it was collected once a month for each of those 6 months. So there were 6 data points collected in total. And these were collected via Qualtrics survey links that were sent out to the champion that we had at each department. And those champions would then push it out to the fire service, their members, either via email, depending on the size, or by like different software that they use to complete tasks like Target Solutions. And then these links were open for 9 days. So each participant had about 9 days to complete the survey. And then after that, there was a period of 30 days until they had their next survey. So for focus, of the 17 geographically stratified departments, there were over 5,000 observations. And then for SAVER, there were over 2,000 observations from those samples. And for analysis, the authors did descriptive statistics to see who was in each group. They calculated the monthly average scores for each of the measures that were on the previous slide. And then they did a linear trend analysis to look at the differences between the start of the study period and the end of the study period. So we'll get into the results. This is the descriptive statistics. So in the focus sample, which is on the left, the 17 departments, a majority of the observations, a majority of the participants were white males with about 11 years of experience and an average age of 39. And then most of them were also non-officers, meaning they were more frontline, either paramedics, EMTs, firefighters, or lifeguards, or dispatchers. And then for the SAVER departments on the right, again, they were mostly white males who are non-officers with about 10 years of experience, and the average age is about 38. So these trends follow the typical makeup of the fire service at the national level. So even though it is pretty skewed with like mostly white men, that's what the fire service looks like in the US. And then here are the department characteristics. The focus department, the mean department or roster size was about 107 people, while the mean SAVER size was about 1,600 people. The number of stations for the focus department's average was about 5 and 61 for SAVER. And then call volumes differed pretty greatly in these two populations, with focus having about 126 fire and 700 EMS, while SAVER had about 4,000 fire and 16,000 EMS. Okay, so this is the table that was provided to show the average scores and the linear trend analysis. So they didn't put a table of the trends of the linear regressions or anything like that. They included it into this to make it a little bit more digestible. So again, on the left is focus and on the right is SAVER. And on the far left are all the measures that they assessed and created scores for. So any number that you see with an arrow on it shows a statistically significant difference of that score within the study period. And then the direction of the arrow is how it decreased. So for example, supervisor sense giving has statistically significant change. It decreased statistically significantly from the start of the study period to the end of the study period in both focus and SAVER. However, those numbers aren't red, and the red numbers mean that they are concerning levels, which means that it doesn't meet the maintenance zone. So the maintenance zone for these measures is 80, and that's based on prior research done by this group. All of these measures, management commitment, supervisor support, leadership, communication, supervisor sense giving, and engagement, morale, satisfaction, we want them to be high, right? So we want them to be above 80% or 80 scores, 80 points on a score. So anything that's below 80 is that red level, which is a concerning level. We want that to be higher. So we can see that management commitment is low and concerning in both groups during the study period. However, there was no statistical significant change. Again, leadership communication was a concerning level for both of these groups as well. Job satisfaction, morale, and engagement on the EMS side were all concerning levels for focus and SABR. So on the next one, we have the levers of well-being. Again, we have concerning levels for decision-making and recovery experience for both populations, and a concerning level for social support in the focus group. And then for the well-being outcomes, the maintenance level here is 40 because these are all things that we want less of. So we want less burnout, less stress, and less intent to leave the profession. So the maintenance zone here is under 40. So anything that's 40 or above is a concerning level. So here, stress, depersonalization, emotional exhaustion, and intent to leave the profession were all concerning levels in both populations. And then you can see how some of these have statistical significant changes over the study period time, like depersonalization on the EMS side in the SABR population, and emotional exhaustion on the EMS side in the focus population. And then the bottom here shows percentage of people who are at high risk for anxiety and depression. And these don't have like a benchmark or a maintenance zone, but we don't want anyone to be at high risk for anxiety or depression. So these are the results of the COVID impact questions. So basically, these were just asked what changed in your life or in your job during COVID-19 or due to COVID-19. And so the most prevalent one was that their work life has changed in more ways than one. And that's followed by exhaustion or tiredness, changes in sleep patterns, lack of sleep, fear of transmitting COVID-19 back to family and friends, and feeling overworked. So you can kind of take a look at this for a minute. But it's pretty similar between focus and SABR, which has the same top 5. So again, their lives changed in more than one way due to COVID-19, followed by exhaustion and tiredness, fear of transmitting COVID to family and friends, changes in sleeping patterns, and then feeling overworked. Cool. So the discussion, there were decreasing scores on management commitment to safety, leadership communication, supervisor sense giving, and participation in decision-making in both populations. And there were concerningly high and increasing mental health impacts, including both components of burnout that were measured here, emotional exhaustion and depersonalization, as well as intent to leave the profession. And then it was also concerning that the percentage, that there was it wasn't over half, but there was still a pretty high percentage of members at risk for anxiety and depression in both of these populations. And then overall, not that these groups are very comparable because they are pretty different, but just looking at the scores, SABR had more negative organizational and well-being indicators than those in the focus sample. So strengths and limitations. This was a longitudinal study, so there was data collected at multiple time points, which I think is a strength, especially considering behaviors during a time where everything is rapidly changing. There were many observations in both groups, which I think is good. The findings were really relevant for the time and kind of give us an insight in this population. And then I think the implications from this are practical and something that the population can take away and actually do something, which I think is really important for research. For limitations, the generalizability is pretty low. This is barely scratching the surface of the fire service as a whole. Most of them are volunteer or unpaid, and they're not really represented in either of these samples. There's definitely reporting bias. Having a really busy population take a survey 6 times in 6 months is really hard. And there was definitely drop off and survey fatigue in reporting. The response rates weren't consistent for each month. So some months the response rates were above that 60% threshold, and some months they were below. So it wasn't reliable data each month. And then we weren't able to track over time for focus. So there was no identifier to be able to see an individual change over time. And then the timing I thought could also be a limitation since this was just the first wave. We know COVID lasted way longer, so it would have been cool to kind of get more and see how it changed over a longer period of time, especially since COVID didn't impact a lot of these states until like 2021. And then there were a lot of potential confounders here that could be contributing to the outcomes that have nothing to do with COVID-19 that were hard to measure for. Cool, and that's all I have. Questions? Yes. Yes.
From standardized Like, is that what the questionnaire pool spits out in terms of a score?
So it spits out, so each of these are constructs that have a lot of things to make up that score, right? So it's decision making, but there's different things that make up decision making. So it's a composite score of that. But yeah, this is what is spit out based on that. And then this was averaged over the 6 months.
So something that was really unclear to me on this same table was, are they looking at individuals that they're clustering into departments, or are they like just looking at departmental level averages? Like the whole time series change in trend analysis was kind of opaque to me. So
Yeah, this is all at department level. Because safety climate and those types of measures don't really make an impact at the individual level, everything is kind of aggregated at the department.
okay.
And it was a little.
Did they see any market difference between those who had the dual role of EMS and fire versus those who only focused on or EMS or fire?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm actually not sure. I don't know if they did analysis for that specifically. What the purpose of this was to target anyone who did EMS, right? So they answered specific questions like burnout and emotional exhaustion in reference to responding to fire and responding to EMS, but primarily everyone in the sample responded to EMS first. So I don't know if they did that. And we know with COVID, a lot of jobs shifted where, you know, there was less fire, so a lot more people went to the EMS side and had to take care of those individuals.
Do we know how any of these in this table compare with other populations?
The survey uses fire industry specific. So it'd be interesting to see how different industries measure these constructs in there than people, but I don't believe that it is.
Dissertation.
Any big data or questionnaire elements that are not in these data that we'd really like to know about?
Yeah, so we also asked kind of about departmental changes. Which I think may be really helpful here. I know that was a big portion of the questionnaire. I can't remember the whole questionnaire off the top of my head, but they definitely collected a little bit more than this. The departmental changes to address like those potential confounders I mentioned that could be affecting this that have nothing to do with COVID-19, like from leadership or just changes that occur within the department anyway. I know those were collected, but I don't think they were included in the specific analysis.
For the ones I'd be wondering about, at least in Salt Lake, probably half of the firefighters have second jobs. And the reason I say that is because if you perturb the system and suddenly there's all kinds of other stuff going on, I would think you would get burnout, but it's not necessarily just because of COVID or just because of the firefighting. It's that's part of their entire life, right? So there's things like that that I kind of wonder about too. And then the kids and what happened and the school closures, and there's so many other things going on that could have contributed to it. Meaning what is causing what is pretty challenging, let alone the issue that this is what happened in June versus October. Yeah, in that year, that's one of those rare examples where month by month you get different results as the craziness that unfolded.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And we did use, because I helped on this project, but it was recruitment of individuals. But we have another one with the qualitative findings. So we did get to ask some of these departments what was really going on. And we got some of those findings there, which was really helpful. So we did hear that a lot of people had second jobs, and you know, childcare was a really big concern in the work-life balance aspect of the mental health. So
I would also be curious, having worked in EMS, there's a huge range of what your shift can be like, whether it's a 12-hour shift, a 10-hour shift, a 24-hour shift, a 36-hour shift, or a 48-hour shift. I've seen all of those. So I'd be curious if the length of the shift also can have something to do with burnout or have some sort of modification effect on any of these, just for fun, because I would think that 48-hour shifts might have more, but you also have the longer break in between. So it'd be really interesting to see that stratified out too.
Definitely, yeah, just anecdotally from that qualitative paper, a lot of people were excited to be back in work and not have to be at home.
Right.
As everyone's home. So they did, at least at this point in time, they relied on their, there. But then you had the people who wanted to be home and wanted to take it, so they were stressed about, potentially getting sick work and being there for longer. So yeah, that would be a really cool thing, especially since when you see one fire department, you see one fire department, they're all so different.
Yeah, they're all very different.
That's what, well, at least for me.
Okay.
What uncontrolled confounding is in there that if you could go back and design data collection elements to control for them, would those elements be?
That's a good question. I think, again, I'm just relying on what I heard in the qualitative aspect of it, because there were a lot of personal feelings of COVID that impacted how people approach their job. I mean, it didn't affect how they got the job done, because, I'm military, regardless of how they feel about things, but, having the impact of what they thought of COVID-19 would have been really interesting for her just to see how that influences their behavior or because if people are still going out and doing whatever, that could be causing stress, or if they can't and they're locked down, then that's possibly causing stress. So I don't know, personal factors.
And a follow-up question, did they capture work, like not just shift work, but people calling in sick? And because I know in talking with friends who are firefighters, they said this might be really hard because of policy and lack of testing during this time, because you remember testing was still really rare. There were some places that said, if you have symptoms, you stay home. And so everyone else was getting called to do extra shifts, which would, right, all of that stuff. Was that tracked at all? Do you know?
I think overtime hours were tracked and personnel of each department was tracked each month. So I do believe, yeah, because the leadership had obviously had to be on board for us to do this, so they would report some department demographic. About COVID.
So they tracked overtime hours, but they didn't track absenteeism.
I don't remember everything that they tracked, but I know they were looking at different groups each month of personnel. I don't know if they know exactly why they were out or if they were out for work, but I know personnel were tracked each month.
Okay.
Thanks.
So what they do,
Anything else?
Hi, everyone. My name is Julia Freeman. I'm one of the residents with the Occupational Medicine Residency Program, and I'll be presenting this article today. So this is a blinded randomized trial of sonographer versus AI for artificial intelligence, cardiac function assessment. This was published in Nature journal by a research team from Stanford, UCSF, and Cedars-Sinai in LA. Collaborative team. So I'm just going to do a bit of an overview here. I know some of us are in direct clinical care, others are not, they're in other programs. So echo or echocardiogram is essentially it's an ultrasound of the heart. This is what it looks like in a grayscale type of picture. As you can see, it's a lot of squiggly lines. So there on the left, and there's a lot of like kind of gray, white, black type of pictures. This is essentially the view of the heart with all the chambers, right ventricle, right atrium, left atrium, and the valves in between. So introduction and significance. So echo is a very common procedure. It's performed very frequently, both in inpatient and outpatient hospital and clinic scenarios. It is done to assess cardiac anatomy and function, as well as some of the adjacent structures to the heart, cardiovascular structures. One of the main measures of cardiac function is the left ventricular ejection fraction. We're going to abbreviate it as LVEF. This is essentially kind of a measure of how much heart is leaving your blood, how much blood is leaving your heart, how much blood is leaving your heart and going out to your body. So echo technicians or sonographers take measurements of the heart and make an initial assessment of the ejection fraction, LVEF, And then the cardiologist, they submit it to the cardiologist, and then the cardiologist look at all the pictures, look at all the numbers, and make the final assessment of what it is. That's the typical procedure. So purpose of this particular study is to evaluate the comparability of LVEF estimates by artificial intelligence versus medical sonographers. The authors stipulate that their study is the first cohort study looking into AI doing that kind of task. So that's pretty interesting, in my opinion. Study design, it was a randomized non-inferiority trial. The study question was, is AI non-inferior to a sonographer in initial assessment and measurement of LVEF? And this is maybe what it looked like, maybe. I'm not sure. And actually, no pun intended, this was, I generated this image with AI. So there it is. So I'm just a quick reminder, and I'm doing this more for myself probably than for most others. I was looking at non-inferiority trial, so I decided to kind of look into what that is. This is a trial that is intended to show that the effect of the new treatment or new procedure is not superior, but just not inferior to the existing treatment protocol. So the key feature, they need to specify a margin above which the lower boundary will lie to call it non-inferior. Methods of the study, so they enrolled 3,769 echo studies performed at the Academic Medical Center. This was Cedars-Sinai in LA. Some of them were excluded. The reason that they were excluded was that the sonographers had to look at all the images and see if the image quality is sufficient for them to trace the left ventricle and to make sure that the image quality is sufficient to make these judgments, right? So 274 were excluded because the sonographers deemed the image quality insufficient to proceed further. The rest of them were randomized in a one-to-one fashion to either AI or to sonographers. And then all of them underwent this kind of initial assessment, and then they were submitted to cardiologists. And the paper goes into more detail about how many years of experience the sonographers and these cardiologists had. And basically it was like 25 sonographers and 10 cardiologists. And the sonographers had like 10 plus years of experience. And so did the cardiologists as a kind of average measures. So what about the AI model? Like who developed it, who trained it? It was trained using 144,000 echoes videos from Stanford Healthcare. So this AI model was developed in Stanford Healthcare. They were never exposed to cardiograms from Cedars-Sinai. So they were treating different populations, different towns. Then they developed an end-to-end workflow. So essentially they created a workflow where AI was able to annotate these echoes and then present it to cardiologists in a kind of a blinded way, in such a way that it was just presented in the same manner as if the sonographer evaluated it, and the cardiologist was not able to tell the difference by looking at the screen as to who did the assessment, if that makes sense. Now this is the blinding. So this is the kind of the main portion of the blinding for cardiologists. They were actually, to assess the blinding, cardiologists were asked to predict the initial assessor. So they got the screen in front of them, and then they were asked who did this. Did AI do this, or did a sonographer do this? So they predicted right in 32.3% cases, wrong in 24.2% cases, and they were unable to tell in 43.4% cases. So the researchers here used something called the Banks blinding index to assess the blinding. I've actually never heard about this before. So essentially, I went back to the paper that initially introduced it. It was introduced in 2004. And I looked at other papers, and it seems like since 2004, it's been one of the two most prevalent blinding assessment indices. So this is an index where perfect blinding is 0 and 1 to -1, or 1 or -1 means complete non-blinding, complete openness. So here blinding index for this study was 0.075 for sonographers and 0.088 for AI. It seems like the authors state that this kind of range, -0.2 to 0.2, is considered good blinding. They were within this margin, so they consider that their study was adequately blinded. So here's the cohort patient characteristics that were in this echo studies. They are presented in table 1. The authors state that their cohorts were comparable on most levels. I looked through this, and it seems to me that they were pretty similarly distributed between AI and sonographers. The outcomes were, the primary outcomes was significant difference between initial assessment and the final cardiology assessment. And the secondary outcome was a substantial difference between the final cardiologist assessment and the previously clinically reported assessment. So something like historical value. So maybe this patient had an echo 6 months ago and it was listed as certain number, and then it is right now, whether it changed or not. Statistics, so the non-inferiority margin was set at 5% and alpha was set at 0.5. This study actually did a very brief statistical analysis description. This is most of what they listed, just a few other things, but it was pretty succinct. So not much to report here besides that. Here's the results. So the primary outcome, there was substantial change between the initial and final assessment occurred in 16.8% of the AI group and 27.2% of the sonographer group. So what it means is that there was a change over 5% between what the sonographer said and what the cardiologist said in the end in 27.2% of this assessment and in 16.8% in AI group. So the difference, the mean difference was 10.4, and the confidence interval was listed there, and the P is less than 0.01 for non-inferiority. So it appears to be non-inferior based on this result. And the mean absolute difference was 2.79% in the AI group and 3.77%. And again, the statistics there are listed. This is kind of the graphic interface that they point here. This is the final cardiologist, and this is AI initial assessment, and this is the trend line in the midline. You can kind of see that the sonographer one is in blue, and it's just a bit more scattered around the trend line than the AI. This is the results tabulated. We can kind of see the same numbers that we've just listed. And then there were other findings. So between the initial and final assessment, 63% of AI and 69% of sonographer studies had any change at all. That's the mean difference there. Sonographers took a median of 119 seconds. They did not list how long AI took, but it's probably much less, I'm assuming, but I guess I shouldn't assume, they should have listed it. But cardiologists took a median of 54 seconds assessing after AI and 64 seconds assessing after sonographer, with a mean difference of 8 seconds. Confidence interval and p-value are there. And then 1.3% in AI group and 3.1% in the sonographer group crossed a clinically significant threshold of 35%. So what that means is that below 35%, if the LVAF is below 35%, it is a clinically significant measure when they say we should probably consider implanting a device, a defibrillator. So it was crossed in these numbers. So I don't know why, but it seems like more so in the sonographer group. So maybe their patients somehow ended up being sicker, although the initial table that presented the cohorts seemed pretty comparable. This is their subgroup analysis, and this is a pretty kind of a busy table, so I won't really go into much detail unless somebody wants to, but it seems like all of those are fairly comparable numbers based on what I looked at, besides this one subgroup here, which had to do with the method of analysis of echo. It can be analyzed in two different very technically kind of oriented things on the machine. So conclusions and discussion. The conclusions that the authors arrive at is that the AI guided evaluation of left ventricular ejection fraction is non-inferior to sonographer guided. Cardiologists were less likely to change the AI evaluation compared to a human evaluation. Cardiologists took less time verifying AI guided evaluation. And then per the authors, prior studies have evaluated AI technology in cardiology, but no study did a blinded evaluation. So the authors concluded their study is pretty valuable and should kind of pave the way for further research into this technology. The strength of the study, this is what I thought off the top of my head, that it's a RCT, so it's a strong study design. It is a fairly large sample size with over 3,000 echoes involved. It is innovative technology, which to me is always interesting. And the assessors were blinded, and the authors did the blinding index evaluation, which seemed to be good. So I think that that's the strength of this study overall. And then here are the limitations. Actually, these are mentioned by the authors. There's a single center reflecting a particular set of practices among the cardiologists and the sonographers. So the results could be changed depending on the institution potentially. Although AI was trained on a different center, so kind of there could be some form of confounding there. There was no assessment of long-term outcomes, so didn't mean anything much clinically for the patients. We're not sure. The trial used previously conducted studies. So the way they did it, they didn't use the echoes that were like going in real time. They took echoes that were already done some time ago and analyzed. So there's a possibility of bias for a sonographer who sees something that maybe they've seen before and versus something that they are seeing for the first time while real-time scanning. And then additionally, they do mention that AI performance improved after a greater number of, like from the first one to the last one, it improved. So the result might change if this whole thing was repeated. It's learning. It's pretty fascinating. And then I guess this my discussion question, and I'm saying this in jest, but but this is kind of my presentation, and I guess just opening up to discussion if anyone has any thoughts on this or thinks about other strengths or weaknesses of this study.
I'll jump in first then. I was actually surprised that this was a randomized controlled trial instead of doing the same images blinded, that have like an agreement matrix, right? To do an evaluation that way and then compare with the gold standard and see what's going on, right? What are your thoughts on this actual study design instead of saying having AI and sonographers assess the same things in agreement and then that goes on to the cardiologist? Does that make sense where I'm going with that?
Sure. And I think that there was some form of it integrated in it because they took a bunch of studies, they identified them as far as I understood from the methods, and then they basically randomized them, but it could be possible that one patient had multiple studies, and so studies from one patient could have gotten in several times. So that's there's some similarity there, but not completely what you said, but I'm not sure why they did it the way they did it. And I definitely see the merit of what you said, Dr. Peace, but I'm not sure why you went this route.
Totally fair.
Following that up, what is the gold standard here
For
determining the what's the accurate test result?
cardiologist assessment.
Okay, and I agree. What is the what study design usually used to try to test a gold standard?
Validation of the gold standard.
This applies for folks who deal with chemicals, exposures, revised and uplifting equations, all that sorts of stuff. What you really want to do is have two people who independently do the measurement, independently do this assessment, because there's too much variability in the data. So then you come to an agreement on what is the answer. And if you do have significant dispute, you usually get a third person or something like that. So then you know what the gold standard is that you're comparing against. And so one of my first questions is that, as far as I can tell, whoever was the cardiologist was the person, right? There's only one. And when that happens, now we gotta start worrying about, well, what about the variability between the cardiologists and which one of them did the training of the sonographers and all kinds of stuff going on all over the place like this. And now I don't know the chemical side of the fence, they confess that, but I can tell you the ergo side of the fence, watch out, because there's a lot of problems with measurement of jobs and revised Nash lifting equations and stuff like that. You can get really biased data.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad this got into nature, but the reality is they don't have they didn't do anything for inter-rater agreement, which is what, we're talking about. They didn't have multiple raters doing each of the different, assessing each of the different, things to be able to determine whether that you were comparing those to a gold standard or not, right? And so whenever we do any type of assessment where we have stimuli and we're saying, okay, what does this look like? And we ask multiple raters and we want to see if those raters agree at a high enough level to be confident that we're getting the same results from these different raters, right? And then Matt's comment, that was my first thought as well. I was like, why weren't we comparing the two alternatives to a cardiologist assessment? Why weren't we saying, is IA as good as? It was more of, is IA, it was kind of odd that they didn't do that. And maybe they did that and the data didn't work. Which I always run to that. Whenever I see something like the natural question here to be answered is this, why didn't they answer this? Well, they probably tried to answer that, didn't work. And so they answered this instead. And that's what they published. Anyway, wasn't really a question there, just more of a, what's going on here?
Speaking of the what's going on here, they never tell you what AI model they use.
Yeah.
Like, they just say AI as if it were magic.
Yeah.
I had to go,
It is, isn't it?
yeah. I had to go to their GitHub page to find out they use a neural network.
Oh, okay.
And like, there are also judgment calls that are made in AI, right? Like you decide the number of layers that the network generates. You decide on feature selection criterion and things like that. There's a lot of judgment calls that go into the formation of an AI model that we kind of want to wash our hands of and say, well, the machine did.
Yeah, it's AI.
And so it really rubbed me the wrong way that they seem to be obscuring, how that sausage is made in the whole article. There's hardly any talk of what the AI model is and what it does.
There is a completely separate paper that just talks about the AI model.
I just need a paragraph.
Yeah.
I need a paragraph. Because like, I'm not gonna go read that paper.
Yeah.
But there's also a lot of articles like that will talk about AI, but they don't want to talk about how the AI model, because they're going to monetize that.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, we built an AI, whatever that might mean.
Yeah.
And we found that it worked really well. Now we're gonna spin off this LLC and sell this AI to replace all your sonographers. Right? So I think there's some of that. It sounds like there's another paper that goes into this one, but that happens, whenever there's a new technology, that happens some. Where let's try and monetize the innovative thing.
Yeah.
So
Another point for everybody doing masters and PhDs, when you write article, it's a good idea to at least put enough information for somebody to digest the article without having to run to go get another. You're just obscuring the process of learning when you do that.
And without reading that other paper, you're questioning everything you're seeing in this paper.
Right.
One thing that interested me was the 274 cases that the sonographer said the image was too poor to be able to outline the left ventricle. Did they mention at all if they tried the AI on those cases? Because that would be an interesting question too. Can the AI evaluate something that a human can't?
It wasn't mentioned. If the sonographer couldn't trace the ventricle on certain images, certain planes, then they just put them out.
What happened to the patients?
Super, I had to repeat that.
And I follow that up with another tangent. You had the figure with the cases which were included in red, and then there was a dropout issue.
Yes.
Yeah, so if AI is really going to replace us, then what's the purpose of the 274 exclusions?
Yeah, that's what.
And who excluded? Yeah, exactly. I mean, the minute you do that, now admittedly, it's under 10%, that's one reason have you pull it up, but still, I mean, obviously, the answer to your question, can AI replace? Well, you're not even close to replacing.
There was a little more enthusiastic last slide, so.
Yeah, I know. I know. You couldn't resist though, because it's like, well, wait a minute, that's a human step right at the beginning.
Would the AI do a good job of identifying them as not being able to be? I mean,
Shouldn't that have been tested?
yeah, 'cause
Yeah.
shouldn't it, why didn't they use that there? Or the
I think it
cardiologists?
So, and sorry, so just getting to the logistics of it, so that means that all echocardiograms were first traced by a sonographer. So then how were they randomized and assigned to a different?
And they did not mention it, they were traced not in a measuring way, but just, can you like, is the image quality good enough that you could just dry line on this?
Right,
So, but did they use different sonographers? They didn't tell, unfortunately.
Yeah, to
Sorry.
Matt's point, you should have had a different one doing that step,
and
even if you're gonna allow a human step at the
Yep.
beginning.
stated it in your text.
Yeah.
And then I also didn't see how it actually was randomized.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I would like to have seen that as well. Was it every other?
One
Was
to
it-
one, they said one.
Which ones do you want? Human? You know what I mean? Like,
And unfortunately, that was not very detailed as far as I could tell. They just said 1-to-1 randomized, but they didn't put a lot of explanation.
The one somewhat reassuring thing though on that was, and I agree with the concern, is the table one, if you look at the data, they do look very similar, okay? So that is somewhat reassuring, because when you have people doing randomization based upon coin flips and, well, I really think this person needs to read this one and all that starts going on. It usually starts showing up in the table. And by the way, that does happen. I'm kidding about what happens with randomization.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, like, papers in this format are very short, and I think a lot of this data is just in the supplementary material. Which can be, I think, doesn't have a page limit, so oftentimes authors on like papers like this will just put in 20-30 pages of supplementary materials, and then very little in the text itself, because I think the page limit is quite short, so it's hard to fit everything. I'd be curious to see that.
Okay, to that point though, all I would have had to said is we use computerized, randomization, and the allocation concealment was done based on, I mean, literally, it ends up being, a half a sentence.
Yeah, I mean, for that.
So on the topic of kind of potential research questions that involve AI. So one thing that you always have to remember with AI is the training data set matters immensely. And one thing about particularly US samples, they tend to be wider, right? And so it may not be so much the case here because we're really talking about like a heart volume thing, but for populations where biological mechanisms might differ somewhat, models trained with fewer observations from minority groups are going to produce worse predictions for those minority groups. So a kind of emerging research agenda in the machine learning world is like this ethics and AI stuff. And there might be room to kind of bring that over into kind of a more occupational health context. If, you're thinking AI ideas.